Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Eric Dunaway with his talk titled, Pay Attention. Dr. Eric Dunaway joined the Wabash faculty in 2018 after receiving his PhD in economics from Washington State University. Go Cougs. His areas of specialty are in microeconomic theory, game theory, behavioral economics, and industrial organization. He's originally from Spokane, Washington, and lives in Lafayette with his wife, Haley, his 3 daughters, Lucy, Sophie, and Erica, and his 3 cats, Pumpkin, Nova, and Hank. During his free time, he studies video games with his children and reads books on poker. He also plays the occasional hand or two. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Dunaway.
Good morning, Wabash. So, I would like to begin my talk today to recognize that today, September 1st, is the first day of Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. I'd like to ask everyone in attendance for a moment of silence as we remember those whose lives have been affected by suicide. Thank you. And if you ever find yourself in a place where you feel suicide is an option, please find me. Please find anyone in here or anyone around you. We would like to make sure that it doesn't happen. So anyways, I would like to thank the Sphinx Club for having me here today. This is the first time I've ever stood here, and as I imagine, the nerves are kicking in just a little bit. So I have a few stories, I have a lesson or two, and I have some advice that I would like to offer to everyone today. I think I'll start with a story first, and I promise all of these events are connected somehow. So I have a lot of curiosity and unfortunately a relatively short attention span at times. To highlight this, at some point in my undergraduate education, I was an applied mathematics major. Then I was a physics major. Then I was a computer engineering major. Then I was a computer science major. Then I was an electrical engineering major. Then I was an applied mathematics major again. And then finally, I settled on economics and I graduated after 11 non-consecutive years. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved every minute of it, and I learned a few things along the way that helped me as an economist today. But sometimes I do wonder if I could have done this a bit more efficiently. I guess that's just the economist in me these days. I wonder, could I have done this a bit better? But you see, even when I was an undergraduate, this problem was nothing new to me. I have memories from me as a child of my mother trying to figure out what to do with a young boy that has a lot of curiosity, but not a lot of attention. So there were times when my mother would need help from my grandparents just to keep an eye on me. She had things that she had to do. And so I recall a time when she asked my grandfather to watch me. And she dreaded that because my grandfather's place was not a great place for a 7-year-old boy with a lot of curiosity but a little bit of attention. So I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about when I say this. It was not a great house for kids. And I was being unleashed upon that house. Well, fortunately, my grandfather had a few ideas of what to do with someone like me. His first idea, and I think this was a great idea, was to get me out of the house. And he took me to a place that was big enough to take me. He took me to the Kingdom to go watch the Seattle Mariners play. This was a great idea because the Mariners at this time had this really young center fielder named Ken Griffey Jr. And if you were a kid in Seattle, you wanted to figure out how he did his swing, and you wanted to copy it. So I loved every minute of that. And through my grandfather and my father, I developed a love of baseball that I still have today. Unfortunately, though, as those who follow baseball know, the Mariners didn't play every day, and sometimes they weren't even in Seattle. So my grandfather needed to have a plan B of what to do with me. Now, this plan was definitely riskier than taking me to a baseball game because it required to keep me in the house. It required me to sit down, and it required me to pay attention. So, my grandfather still believed this was possible. What he did was he pulled out a deck of cards and he started teaching me how to play. Now, the first game we played together was Slapjack, which is a great game for young kids. You play it by each player takes turn putting over cards, and as soon as you see a jack, you slap it. Pretty intuitive name on that one. Unfortunately, that one was too easy for me, and I lost interest very quickly. The next game we tried was another great game for kids. Where I come from, we call this one War, where each player puts a card face up, highest card takes both cards. But if you played War once, you've played it 100 times. Really, for me, it got boring quickly. A little frustrated, my grandfather decided that, well, we need to play something a little bit more complicated. And he knew I was pretty good at math for a first grader. So I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't that game. He decided that he would pick one of his favorite games to teach me. And that game was called Gin Rummy. So Gin Rummy is a game that's played with 10 cards, and both players attempt to get sets of the same card rank, so a group of 3 or 4 sevens, for example, or runs out of all of their 10 cards at once. We ran into a problem immediately in that my hands weren't big enough to hold 10 cards. Well, my grandfather, the improvisationist that he is, figured we'd play with 7 instead. Crisis averted. I was hooked. This game let me count. This game let me figure out patterns. It was everything I could have ever hoped for. I sat at that table all day, and I learned, and I learned, and I paid attention. I had fun. I managed to beat my grandfather at hand pretty early on. At that point, I thought I was the greatest card player that had ever lived as a 7-year-old boy. Then my grandfather stopped letting me win. Now, even still, I could win the occasional hand, but looking back on it, and of course I don't remember what the actual hands were, I was probably just getting lucky, because luck is a factor in these games. But he was clearly the better player, and even my young self could figure that out. I started wondering, how did he do it? How was he beating me so often? Now, these are the kind of questions, a 7-year-old boy will ask himself. So, anyways, I was pretty convinced that my grandfather was just getting lucky, and, maybe this was just a streak. Maybe I needed to find somebody else to play on and kind of reset my luck. Now, the next player I played cards with was actually my grandmother. Another day, I was spending time with her. And I actually approached her and asked her if she knew how to play gin rummy. She looked at me kind of a little bit annoyed when she realized that my grandfather had taught me how to play cards. But she acquiesced, and we played together, and I figured she'd be easy pickings, because it didn't even seem like she liked cards. She beat me even worse. I noticed more and more as I played with her that when she won the game, she would play the exact card I needed to win. How lucky can a person get to pull that off time after time? Now, I do want to clarify that I was loving every minute of this. I'd found something that was incredibly interesting to me, a puzzle that I couldn't figure out. It's just that thing that when you're so curious that you have to keep working to figure out how to do it. It was just a bit frustrating for a 7-year-old boy. I mean, it was. So I continued to find new people to play with. My mother was the next target. And I was thrilled to learn that we had a deck of cards in our junk drawer. I didn't know we had a deck of cards before I asked her about it. Now, it didn't get better for me because Mom was probably the best gin rummy player of the three. Now, I could beat my grandfather about a third of the time. I could beat my grandmother maybe a quarter of the time. I remember almost never winning against my mother. Each time she won, it was that same phenomenon. She was playing exactly the card I needed to win. There was only one conclusion that I could make, gentlemen. She must have been cheating. So I want to give everybody my first piece of advice today. Regardless of whether she is doing it or not, never accuse your mother of cheating at cards. And that's all I have to say about that one. So many years later, and I didn't understand this until much, much later. Maybe I was an undergraduate, maybe even after that. I figured out what my problem was. You see, I thought I was paying attention. I was looking at my cards. I was seeing what I could make from them. But I wasn't paying attention to my opponent. I wasn't paying attention to what they were doing. And they were paying attention to me. They knew what I needed to win and made sure I didn't get it. Now, it also helps that as I got older, I learned that my grandfather's actually a professional gambler. I also learned that my grandmother is a champion bridge player. And I learned that my mother was trained by both of them. So their skill caps were just a bit higher than mine. And they probably still are. I talk to my grandmother about once a month, and she tells me about how she's gotten kicked out of another bridge league, not because she's cheating, but because she rarely ever loses. So these are great conversations, but talking to her, learning about the techniques she uses to memorize cards, memorize what she's seen, that has been instrumental in teaching me many things and well beyond playing cards. So I tell you this story because, like so many things in my life, what once was old is new again. A little bit over a year ago, I picked back up my love of card games with a new study. I decided that I wanted to learn everything there is to learn about poker. I've only been working on this for about a year. Now, I'd played casually for years, but I just never given it any thought beyond curiosity. In truth, for the last several years, I was much too busy with other things, like going to grad school and starting a family, that I didn't have much attention to dedicate to playing or learning about poker. And I want to make sure that we differentiate that right there. Playing and learning about something are very different things. And I wanted to focus on the latter rather than the former. And that's kind of what's led into my tutorial this year. This time, however, coming back to it, I was armed with an education and not even realizing it, whether I did this consciously or subconsciously, I'd gotten an education that really lended itself well to studying poker. So this curiosity that I had, I realized it was shared by one of the greatest scientists in my opinion. He's the legendary mathematician John von Neumann. Now, John von Neumann's exploits were legendary. He worked on the Manhattan Project. He was a contemporary of Turing. But he really, really was fascinated with poker. And in fact, he got together with an economist by the name of Oscar Morgenstern And together, they formalized the discipline, which is now game theory. And the reason why they formalized game theory is because von Neumann wanted to figure out how to win at poker. Now, von Neumann never got good at poker, unfortunately, but he met the love of his life there, so I would count that a win in my book. So, the first and probably most important thing I learned in my quest to understand poker is that you have to pay attention. And I'm not just talking about paying attention to the cards you have. You have to pay attention to everything. Because if you can't pay attention, you won't observe the patterns in your opponent's behavior, or more importantly, the deviations in the patterns. It's the deviations that tell the story. It's not what's the same, it's what's different. And they can be the difference between winning or losing. Now, before I'd gotten here, I'd already read plenty of papers, I'd read plenty of books by many notable psychologists like Daniel Kahneman. I'd read books by the economist Richard Thaler that touch on topics like mental accounting, attention, bounded rationality, and many others. And I'd learned quite a bit. But I realized that if I really wanted to get better at paying attention, I needed a teacher. I needed someone who could really help me understand that from a different perspective. I'm fortunate now to have a teacher in those topics, which is Wabash's own Dr. Preston Bost, here at Wabash, of course. I've so far sat in on 2 of his cognition lectures, and I'll let everybody know that I'm now considering changing my major to psychology. So let me get to the point of this talk. I want to share with you a few things I think I've figured out about attention. Now, I'll tell you all that I don't know the formal names for any of this because, like I said, I've only sat in on 2 cognition lectures so far. So I'm going to explain to the best of my ability based upon what I think I have figured out. The first thing is that attention is a scarce resource. And here it goes, I'm talking like an economist already. We only have so much attention, and we allocate attention to activities at any given time. Just like money or time, we make decisions, whether consciously or not, on what to do with our attention. Sometimes we simply react. When put in a situation of danger due to a loud noise or another perceived threat, we focus on the source. We pay attention to it immediately. We get really focused quite quickly. But in my experience, this is usually accompanied by stress. We don't like being in those situations. We want to get out of them as soon as possible. So if we're looking for a way to hone our attention, or looking for a way to think about our attention, this may not be the best way to get me to focus on demand. Now, when we say things like pay attention, most of us consider it like a command to give your attention to some specified object. Pay attention in class. Pay attention to what I'm saying. Pay attention. As an economist, however, I hear this and I think of a second meaning for something if we think about it like paying costs. I think of attention and paying the attention as a cost. So turning this into a bit of economics, as humans, we accrue costs that must be paid with our attention. Now, I'm not going to bore everyone who hasn't taken Econ 101 by discussing what might be fixed or variable with these costs. We're just going to talk about them as costs. But I'd like to categorize them in 3 different ways. And I've chosen these semi-arbitrarily, but I'd like to think about 3 different types of attention costs. So the first one are characteristics that are intrinsic to ourselves. They're part of who we are. So like I said at the beginning of the talk, I had trouble paying attention as a child. I had trouble paying attention in class as a teenager and as an undergraduate and going into graduate school. You see, my way of not paying attention wasn't that I couldn't sit still. My way of not paying attention was that I would fall asleep in class. Now, for others in here who have ever fallen asleep in class, that's kind of terrifying. Why am I falling asleep in class? Am I offending the professor? Am I just a bad student? Those things that your anxieties will tell you, you're doing something wrong. But that was my problem, and that was how I felt about that problem at the time. And again, I always thought it was because I was bored. I tried everything from caffeine to snacks to getting up and going to the bathroom during class. None of it helped me to stay awake. The second I would lose my focus, I'd be asleep in class, and I'd feel bad about it every time. It wasn't until just after my youngest daughter was born that a chance visit at the doctor's office, I mentioned it to the doctor, and she began asking me more questions. I answered them thinking nothing of it. Then she asked me a question that changed my life forever. She asked me, "Have you ever been screened for sleep apnea?" It turns out that I don't sleep like other people do. In fact, I stop breathing while I'm asleep. Every time I stop breathing while I'm asleep, the lower parts of my brain trigger an alert because I've stopped breathing. What does it do? It wakes me up. So I might lay there for 8 hours a night trying to sleep, but I might only get 15 minutes of sleep because every time I stop breathing, I wake up and I never even notice it. So as a result, I was almost always just exhausted to the point where if my focus slipped at all, I just dozed off. And it wasn't even really something that I noticed that I was exhausted because I was always in that state. I didn't know that a different state existed. So it turns out that I wasn't a bad student. Well, that's debatable. I wasn't bored. I just had sleep apnea. Most of those horrible things that my anxiety told me about myself turned out to not be true. Now, the good news is, shortly after my diagnosis of sleep apnea, I received treatment for my condition. I have a machine now that I put over my nose while I sleep and basically prevents me from stop breathing. And I'll tell you guys that changed my life. I woke up the next morning after getting used to this thing, and I realized that I had only been asleep for about 4 hours, but I felt completely different because, like I said, I'd probably been sleeping for about 15 minutes a night. Getting 4 hours is just a jackpot. It got better. I sleep normally now, and I still use the machine every night just because I've gotten to the point where I can't sleep without it. But again, it drastically improved my ability to pay attention, and it removed a cost on my own attention, which is fatigue. When we're tired, it's harder to pay attention. Now, speaking more generally, we may have something intrinsic about ourselves that interferes with our ability to pay attention. This doesn't make you a bad person. This doesn't make you a bad student. It doesn't make you a bad friend or anything else. It just exists as a cost that you must pay in terms of your own attention. And it prevents you from allocating as much attention as you would like to the things that you care about. Fortunately, most of these intrinsic issues are treatable. Unfortunately, I can't help you with them. Bit out of my lane. The good news, though, is that I know a lot of doctors who can. So, if you find yourself struggling to focus or pay attention for any reason, just talk to your doctor about it. Mention it to them. At worst, it's someone who will listen. At best, maybe they'll start asking you some follow-up questions, and maybe that can lead to something better for you. Also, if you snore, and your roommate knows if you snore, and if you feel tired all the time, please get screened for sleep apnea. I probably had it for 20 years before anyone ever asked me about it. It changed my life when I got diagnosed and got treatment for it. And because I got screened, I've already had my children screened for it, and 2 of them have it. They're already getting that treatment. The second type of attention cost I'd like to talk about, I refer to as environmental costs. These are the things in our lives we have little control over, but tax our thoughts and attention. On one end, it could be as simple as a nagging injury from practice. You know, you pulled your hamstring and it's just hurting. Well, your mind will return to it when least convenient to remind you it is still there. Most wounds work that way. Maybe you're sleep deprived. Now, I'm not talking about, you have a sleeping disorder, but maybe you just stayed up too late last night. I heard that happens here. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you just forgot to use the bathroom before chapel. Sometimes these costs aren't a huge deal. We just need to pay them. Oh, look at that, a distraction. We'll talk about that in a moment. Sometimes these costs aren't a huge deal, but we just need to take better care of ourselves to remove them. Sometimes these costs are a huge deal. These costs show up well beyond the realm of self-care. If you are dealing with trouble in a relationship with your partner, that's a cost on your attention. If you are worried about the well-being of your family members, that's a cost on your attention. If you or someone you know is the victim of racial injustice, that's a cost on your attention. If you are struggling with your sexual or gender identity, that's a cost on your attention. And these costs must be paid. Ignoring them doesn't make them go away. It just causes them to accrue interest. And it gets worse. These costs, they aren't mutually exclusive. And unfortunately, they tend to add up to more than the sum of their individual parts. I think about this a lot. How can I expect someone to pay attention to calculus when he doesn't know if his little brother is okay? What should I do when a student has no attention left to give me in class? I don't have satisfying answers to either of these questions or any others like them. I don't know. While neither I nor most of the people here are experts in helping people out with these environmental costs, we can do 2 things. The first thing we can do is pay attention ourselves. Look for the deviations. They tell the story. Listen. Be there. Be present. The other thing we can do is help them get the help that they need. Sometimes they just need a friend to talk to. Other times they need to speak with a professional, like those in our incredible counseling center here at Wabash. By the way, it's on the second floor of the Ginny Hayes house, right over there. From here, just walk around the arch. Don't walk under it, freshmen. You walk to the end of the path, and then it's on the opposite corner. You really can't miss it. There's signs everywhere. And if you've ever wanted to go there, but are a bit apprehensive of going there, I want you to come find me. Or maybe find any of these guys with pots here, sitting in the front. We'll walk with you there. We'll make sure you get there. The third and final type of attention costs I want to talk about are distractors, like we just experienced. Believe it or not, the world we all live in is designed intentionally to strip you of your attention. From your social media feeds to the student email list, we're bombarded with 1,000 needles a day, all wanting a piece of our attention allocation. Smartphones make this problem even worse. My Econ 101 students are starting to get used to me when I lecture from the back of the room in Baxter 114. Sometimes I see them looking over their shoulders to figure out why I'm back there. I do this for a few reasons, because one of the key reasons is I want you guys looking at the slides and not me. I'm lamenting not having my PowerPoints here today. But one of the reasons I do this is because when I'm standing in the back of the room, I can see every screen that's open in class at the same time. Now, the good news is most students have class materials open, which is awesome. I love that. But some definitely do not. Now, I've never said anything about this to any of my students, but I have seen it. The reasons why I don't say anything, those are my own. I'm going to keep them to me. But I do notice what you guys do. I notice what other students do as well. And this seems like the good time and a good place to preach about it. So nothing frustrates me more than when a student tells me that they saw the email I sent them while they were in class. Checking your email is important. I probably told that to freshmen as they were coming in many, many times. But I can promise you, my emails are not that interesting. They are not so important that you need to be checking them in class. If I need a reply from you immediately, I'll choose something other than email. I am not expecting you to check your email in class, and I don't think any other professor at Wabash is either. We would much rather you be focusing and paying your attention to class. The same goes for direct messages, GroupMe, and all other ways we communicate via text. It can wait. So, how do these distractions happen? Well, tell me if this sounds familiar. Suppose I send you a snap via Snapchat, and no, I don't have a Snapchat, sorry. But when I do that, it causes a notification to pop up on your phone. Your phone vibrates, which distracts you and causes you to look at it. Same thing with that Amber Alert that just happened. Well, in this case, you see a snap, and the fear of missing out has already set in. Is it a new meme? Is this a joke that I really want to see? Now, Snapchat has your attention, not class. It's distracted you and cost you your attention. Distractions cause us to miss opportunities by misallocating our attention. Whether it's to learn something, to spend time with someone we care about, or anything else that is important at that time, we end up paying a distraction cost rather than giving our attention to something much more beneficial to ourselves and to those around us. So what can we do about this one? Well, I have a solution for this that I've told a couple students, but the solution's a bit extreme, and I'm not going to propose it here. But I do have a challenge for everyone here. I challenge you to take your phones out, go ahead and do that now, and look at everything that sends you notifications. Look at your social media feeds, look at TikTok, look at GroupMe, look at your email chains, look at your text messages. I'm sure many of you have notifications on your phone right now that you really want to look more into. My challenge to you is to open up each one of those apps and turn the notifications off. Now, make it so that you engage with these distractors on your own terms. Don't let them call out to you. You go to them when you want to give them your attention. So as this talk comes to a close, I want to summarize a few things I've learned about attention. Many things place costs on our ability to pay attention. Some of them we cannot control, while others we can. For those we can't control, there is help. Ask for help. Pay attention when someone else asks you for help. We can help each other. I can't guarantee that we can make the cost go away completely, but I bet we can find ways to make it smaller. And that's a win. Some costs to your attention will never go away, but we can make those costs smaller, and I'd like to help. For the things we can control, take control. Choose to give your attention to the people and things you care about. Be there, be present, and put your phone away. I wanted to thank everyone one more time for giving me their attention for this talk. By paying attention, we can continue making Wabash a great place for everyone. Wabash always fights. Wabash pays attention. Thank you.